Notre Dame fans, welcome back to Irish Breakdown. We are going to talk some Notre Dame football today. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, joined today by our football analyst, Vince D'Addario. And today's topic, Vince, we are going to talk about the biggest losses and the biggest returners for Notre Dame in 2022. Now, the premise is losses of players who would have had normal eligibility remaining.
Right.
Now, obviously, everyone had an additional year. But we're not talking about COVID players per se.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about like fifth-year seniors like Ian Book or Liam Eichenberg, or even a senior like a Robert Hainsey, who was a four-year player.
Yeah, right.
Four-year starter. We're talking about guys who left with legit eligibility on the table. Who were the biggest losses? And then who were some of the guys that, and we could also go with transfers or NFL guys. And then who are the biggest returners? And that would be the same thing. Guys who chose to come back, who otherwise could have gone to the NFL or could have transferred or thought about transferring. So that's kind of what we're going to discuss today, Vince, because I think those decisions a lot of times can have a big impact on what your team is going to look like that next year.
No doubt.
You know, when you think of Manti
Especially with
Te'o,
some of these guys.
Right. 2011, Manti Te'o and Tyler Eifert deciding to forego the NFL. And come back for 2012. Notre Dame does not go undefeated in 2012 if both of those guys choose not to come back. Zach Martin had coming back in 2013. That kind of thing. And so I think those decisions are Michael Floyd coming back. So there's always guys that choose to come back, and those things can have a big impact. Or guys leave early, and you don't get those guys. What would Notre Dame's season have looked like in 2010 if Jimmy Clausen and Golden Tate didn't go pro?
Yeah.
So those are things that we'll talk about. And I think there's a couple good options for this discussion today. And so let's kick things off, Vince, by focusing on the Notre Dame offense. And I want to begin by, obviously, had it not been for COVID, no one would have discussed, Robert Hainsey, Tommy Kramer, or Liam Eichenberg, and Ian Book. They were gone. They were right. Leaving no matter what.
No more eligibility left.
There were,
correct.
There were some other guys that have left, that had eligibility left, and maybe guys that some people would not have thought were going to leave. So when we talk about the Notre Dame offense, what, in your view, was the biggest loss that Notre Dame suffered from its offense heading into next season of a player that could have or maybe even should have come back?
Well, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's Tommy Tremble. And the reason being is, look, Notre Dame has a very deep tight end class. There's no question about that. I mean, a tight end room, depth chart. It's tight end U. They've got great tight ends. There's no question about that. The problem is, after Mayer, obviously, and Tremble, there's a lack of experience, I guess is the best way to put it, on the rest of the depth chart. That doesn't mean there's not talent there. It's just a lack of experience. And, anybody that watched a Notre Dame game knows the impact that Tommy Tremble had on this offense throughout the entire season. And he was an integral part in what they were doing in the run game. He should have been more a part of the pass game. That's one of the major reasons that he is out the door, frankly. And I think this is a bit of a knock on the coaching staff. I'm not happy with the fact that he met with the coaching staff, and when he left that meeting, he's like, yeah, I'm going pro. Like, that was very disappointing to me. I think that they should have pulled out all the stops, to try to get him to stay. And maybe they did, but maybe he's heard it all before. Mm-hmm. And he's seen what those promises are. And so I'm disappointed that he's not coming back. I think he could have upped his draft stock if we're talking about draft stock. If he comes back for another year and he's an integral part in the pass game, I think his draft stock goes up.
I think he's a first-round talent.
I do too. I really do. And
he hasn't proven himself to be that yet, but that's why I said first-round talent.
And here's the thing. It's like you and I kind of tossed around the idea of doing like a sleeper thing for the NFL draft. He could potentially be one of those guys, right? Mm-hmm. Because the ceiling is very high for Tommy Tremble. I think that he needed another year in college to really kind of cement his draft stock and where he could fit. But if he gets to the right NFL program with the right coaching staff, et cetera, the right strength program, all that stuff, then he could really blossom as a tight end in the league. But I think it's a shame that he took off. That opens up opportunities for other guys on the roster, obviously. But, yeah, man, I wish he was coming back for a fourth year. I just really think both sides could have benefited from another year of Tommy Tremble?
I think it's hard to disagree with what you're going with, but I'm going to, and I'm going to go a different direction. And I'm going to go with Aaron Banks.
And
the reason that I'm going with Aaron Banks is twofold. Number one is there's no guarantee the Notre Dame coaching staff would have used Tommy Tremble properly.
No guarantee.
They didn't do it this year. So what's to make you think they're going to use him more in year 2 when Michael Mayer is now a sophomore?
Which is why he left. I mean, that's why he left the door.
Part of it. It's part of it. It's part of it. But I think the other thing is, to me, it's like next year you're going to have a deeper receiving core. And this was the thinnest receiving core you've had in several years. And you still didn't use him in the pass game the way that you should have.
Right.
So I'm with you. I think it gets exciting to think about what the pass game could have been with Tommy Tremble next year. But it should have been that in 2020.
Yeah, you're right.
And so, and also when you talk about a skill player, like you said, he still would have been their second best tight end next year. As good as I think he is, he still would have been their second best tight end next year. Aaron Banks would have been their best offensive lineman. I also look at it from a standpoint of the offensive line is so integral to what Notre Dame wants to do. If you'd have brought back a second multi-year starter to go with Jarrett Patterson, probably would have moved Aaron Banks out the left tackle, maybe right tackle. He would have played outside. Now, all of a sudden, you're in a situation where we could have still had a discussion about moving Jarrett Patterson, and maybe he would have gone out to right tackle, or maybe he goes out to left tackle, and Aaron Banks goes out to right tackle. Now, all of a sudden, you got some bookends on the outside, or might have just solidified. Well, yeah, we're going to leave Jarrett Patterson at center. So it would have given the Notre Dame coaching staff two very experienced, talented players, and now you're talking about you have him, Aaron Banks, you have Zeke Correll, you have Josh Lugg, you have Jarrett Patterson. You've now got some veteran players that 3 veteran players, especially in Lugg, Patterson, and Banks, have played a lot of football. And then you have Correll, who got some very valuable experience late in the year last year. Dylan Gibbons made a couple, appearances last year. He's a veteran player. Now, so I'd have felt a whole lot better about the offensive line in 2021 if Aaron Banks would have came back. And the offensive line still has a chance to be good, but it's a lot more what ifs. And as a football coach, you want as few what ifs or maybes or I thinks as possible,
especially on the offensive
there.
line.
Exactly right. Exactly right. You want saying like, I know what this guy can do, right? And like with Josh Lugg, for example, even if Josh Lugg just plays like he did in 2019, you're going to have a good right tackle or a good right guard, whatever position they play him at. And so I think that now it's especially if you move Jarrett Patterson out to left tackle. There's what ifs at all 5 positions, and Aaron Banks would have helped kind of be a really strong foundation with him and Jarrett Patterson could have formed a really good 1-2 punch. And you talked about Tommy Tremble needing to develop his game. Aaron Banks needs a lot of development with his game too. Yes. I think he was more raw coming out of high school than Robert Hainsey, Liam Eichenberg, and Tommy Kramer, especially Eichenberg and Hainsey, who were well schooled in high school, well coached in high school. Aaron Banks was not as well coached coming out of high school. He's still a raw player, immensely talented. And I think his talent alone is going to get him picked in the 2nd or 3rd round. But I truly believe if Aaron Banks would have come back, for him personally, I think he would have been a 1st-round pick next year.
I think that's a really good point because we talked about this on WSBT Radio Sports Beat program on Monday. And one of the things that I said was that Aaron Banks, if he comes back, he's going to start at tackle, and that only ups his stock because when you're an NFL draft analyst and you're a front office guy or whatever, especially with the roster limits that you're tied to in the NFL, 53-man rosters or whatever the case may be with COVID and all that, if you can take a guy who can play outside and inside and he's one of your backups, and I'm not saying that Banks would automatically be a backup. What I'm saying is when you have versatility like that, that's one roster spot that opens up for another position. That makes you so much more valuable to GMs across the league. And look, Aaron Banks has a couple snaps at tackle. He moved out there during the injury.
Not even a half. I mean,
it wasn't. He's got some film. If he could have had a whole year's worth of film, he skyrockets up the depth chart, I think, as far as what the NFL's looking for.
I think so too, Vince, because I don't even look at it from a backup standpoint. I get the point you're making, right, about the versatility. But to me, right now, teams that are – no one's going to draft him in late in 1st round, early 2nd round to potentially move him to tackle. No. What I mean is no one's going to draft him no one's going to draft him to play tackle. No one in the late 1st round or early 2nd round is going to draft him thinking we're going to move him to tackle. because, like you said, you just don't know if he can do it.
Sure.
You know, a quarter and a half against Florida State doesn't do that. Maybe somebody does, but I don't see it.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have enough film of it. Someone's going to draft him to play guard, and that limits. Not everybody needs a guard, but a year of tackle meant going into the 2022 draft. Anyone that needed a guard is going to look at Aaron Banks.
Yes.
Anyone that needs a right tackle is going to look at Aaron Banks.
Right.
And depending on how he did at left tackle, because you and I have discussed this in the past, he's a really athletic kid for 330 plus pounds.
Yes.
I would have liked to seen what he could do as a full-time left tackle. And if he would have played, you know, at a high level, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's like a really good college tackle that's going to be a guard in the NFL. But if he would have handled that well, now all of a sudden, you know, there may be some teams that look at him as kind of a left tackle type of prospect. Right. But at the very least, he's a guard, you know, left, right guard plus a right tackle.
Right.
And to your point, that only ups his value because right now, anyone that's looking for a left tackle is not going to be looking at Aaron Banks.
They're not.
Only teams that need a guard are going to look at him. So again, I think it would have upped his draft value quite a bit. But I also think it, more importantly, for the focus of this, is it would have helped Notre Dame tremendously to have him back. And he would have had to be a leader. I don't think Aaron is like a captain type of guy. It's just not his personality or responsibility. But he wouldn't have to be because you'd have Jared Patterson back.
Right.
So he could just kind of focus on building his game. So I think that was a big loss for Notre Dame. And I don't think the depth chart, it's not as easy to replace you know, a consensus All-American guard as it is at Notre Dame or anywhere as it is for Notre Dame to replace a number 2 tight end. And as talented as he is. And I think that's the other thing that factors into it. All your points about Tommy Tremble's talent, 100% agree with. But he wasn't as important to the offense as Aaron Banks was because of how he was used.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it comes from for me. Aaron Banks is more of a focal point of what they would want to do offensively, where Tommy Tremble wasn't. Now, we could argue that he should have been and all that, and 100% agree with that.
No question.
But just based on what he was, it's going to be easier to replace his 19 catches and blocking than it would be to do some of those other things. I mean, because you could basically replace his blocking with an RPO system.
Yeah, you're right.
If you know what I mean? So, and Michael Mayer is going to be a better blocker. And, you know, I'm looking forward to see what Kane Barron can do as a blocker because he reminds me a lot of Tommy Tremble coming out of high school. So that's why I'd have to go with Aaron Banks on that one.
Well, and look, if I'm in Tommy Tremble's shoes and I'm hearing what the coaches had to say and I'm looking at how 2020 went and, you know, just putting all the eggs in the basket and seeing what we've got, I'm going to the NFL too.
Right.
I do not blame him in any way for doing what he did.
He's always had his eye on the NFL. I mean,
sure.
I heard before the season started that he was thinking about going to the NFL. And part of me wonders if maybe they didn't use him as much because they didn't want to lose him to the NFL. I've had people bring that up as a possible conspiracy theory. I mean, I can't possibly know that, but would it shock me? No, not really. But, you know, I mean, that's just kind of one of those fun off-season conspiracy theories. Let's talk about guys that came back. And guys that came back can be guys that were thinking about transferring, guys that are thinking about going pro. The difficulty in this conversation is all the guys that could have gone pro chose to go pro. Yeah. And that's obviously Tommy Tremble and Aaron Banks, who we discussed. But there were some guys that were contemplating about, you know, maybe transfer, not contemplating it. I don't want to assume that they were having those conversations, although with some guys I've heard that was happening. But, you know, guys that you could have understood if they would have left or gone somewhere else. And now them coming back should put Notre Dame in a good position. So we're going to start off with your opinion, Vince, and you're going to be very thematic in today's offensive conversation. So your guy is,
you know, before I reveal, I just want to say that as you were talking, I started thinking about another guy, and I started making an argument in my head for this other guy.
Don't say it.
I'm not going to.
Because I didn't tell you who my guy was. So
I know. And I'm thinking you might go with this guy, but I'm not 100% sure. So
don't try and steal my thunder, Vince.
I'm not.
You are locked into your tight end theme today. So
I'm locked in.
You own it and roll with it, baby. Let's go.
Let's go. Look, I'm going to own George Takis because, look, he just finished his third year at Notre Dame. He was an early enrollee, and so he
could have graduated in May.
That's exactly
right. A lot
of
the kids that are from his 2018 class that are leaving and transferring, Jack Lamb, Obi Agofu, Micah Jones, a lot of those guys, they're graduating in May, and they're leaving with a Notre Dame degree.
Yes.
And he certainly could have been one of those guys because he's been so buried on the depth chart in recent years.
And so what that means is he could have transferred, and played right away. And there's plenty of programs out there that would have happily accepted George
Yeah.
Takis as their number one tight end. So the fact that he stuck around, I think, is absolutely huge because he's going to go into spring as the understood number 2 tight end. Now, will he be able to hold on to it? There's a lot of talent behind him. They've got Bauman, who's a redshirt freshman, obviously, and then you got the 2 kids, Kane Barong, and then the other kid, help me.
Mitchell Evans.
Thank you, Mitchell Evans, who are coming in as true freshmen. So a lot of talent behind him. So will he be able to hold on to that number 2 spot? I hope so, because we got a glimpse as to what George Takis could do in the North Carolina game and in the Alabama game. And frankly, I think he was underused in the Alabama game. There were times where he was open. He just wasn't targeted the way he should have been.
He wasn't underused because they were putting him in routes. He was under-targeted because of the quarterback. But
okay.
That's a different conversation for a different day.
It's making me mad. Making me upset. Yeah, I got to stay focused here on what we're talking about. But I think George Takis has every possibility of being one heck of a number 2 tight end. And look, this is Notre Dame. If you're the number 2 tight end at Notre Dame, you're going to get plenty of playing time. And
you're going to get drafted.
And you're going to get drafted. And as we have talked about, if it appears that Notre Dame is doubling down on the fact that they want a boatload of tight ends. And so that means this is a tight end-centric offense. And I'm hoping that he's not just going to be used as a blocker. I'm hoping that they get him out in routes. They do some more things with him because I think he could shine in that role. So I'm excited that he's back, because if he doesn't come back, while there's talent behind him, it's inexperienced talent. And you could say that George Takis is inexperienced, but he's been in the program. This will be his 4th year. He doesn't have a ton of on the field experience, but he's got experience in the program. Those other guys don't have experience in either direction.
Right.
So having George Takis back, I think, just makes that room stronger, makes that depth chart stronger.
And I think, too, I mean, he not only played against North Carolina this year, played against Alabama. He got some snaps this year. And I still remember that touchdown he had in 2019 against Duke that he caught for me in Book, which was a heck of a catch.
Yes.
And George Takis hasn't been on the bench at Notre Dame because he lacks talent. He's been on the bench at Notre Dame because he's had legit high end of the draft, top of the draft level talent ahead of him. Obviously Cole Kmet.
Right.
Then Tommy Trumbull, and then
Michael
this year
Mayer.
was Michael Mayer and Tommy Trumbull and Brock Wright, and so he that's kind of been his scenario. It's not from a lack of talent. There's I could think of at least nine teams in the ACC alone, and that's just off the top of my head. That would be like, yeah, we'll take him. To your point, we'll take him, and he can start for us. So to stick it out, I mean, it says a lot about the value of that Notre Dame degree, and also about his willingness to compete. So. And obviously he's going to have to hold on to that job, because if he's not number 2 at the end of spring, then he still could leave. But to the point of this discussion is he's coming back to battle for that job, and it's important. And then that way, if somebody does beat him out, that means that guy's playing really, really well.
Exactly.
Because George Takis is not going to go down without a fight. And if he is the number 2 tight end next year, it gives Notre Dame some interesting opportunities on what they can do with Michael Mayer and moving him around and using him as more of a hybrid type of player this year too, to get some isolations and different things. So I think that's going to be good if George comes back and if he's healthy and he can stay locked in. I think he's going to add value to the offense. I'm going a little different direction.
I'm on pins and needles here because I want to see if you're going to go with the guy I was thinking of,
Avery Davis.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, there's a couple things with Avery. Avery, number one, he could have tried to go pro and said, "Hey, look, this is who I am, and I am what I am, and I've got my degree, and I'm going to go pro." He could have been a grad transfer somewhere and said, "Hey, I'm going to go finish my career somewhere else." So bringing him back for his 5th year, because you don't often see receivers come back for their 5th season, at least not good ones. So to get him back for his 5th season to me is important, because I think Avery Davis is one of the most undervalued players on the Notre Dame roster, not just among fans, but among the coaching staff. I thought he was criminally underused at times this year, and even when he was having success, he was still underutilized with things he could do. It's like they would throw him certain routes. He was going to get crossers. He was going to get some drags. They finally threw him a deep ball against Clemson, but then they called it again in the title game, and
didn't throw it to him,
even though he was just as open as he was the last time. But then they'd run these like really lame jet sweeps with him, and then they go wildcat, and instead of putting the former quarterback back there, they put Avery Davis back there. I mean, how do you have a guy that you recruited as a quarterback, never throw a pass in any situation?
Right.
It's just like, I mean, come on, guys. Let's use this guy.
It's okay to be obvious with what you want to do.
Right. It's like use all your weapons, right? And I thought he was really where Tommy Rees did a really good job of using Avery Davis was on third down. His designs for Avery Davis on third down a lot of times were really well done, and he was able to execute and make the plays. I mean, he made some clutch plays last year. I mean, his touchdown against Duke in the end zone was not an easy catch, and the game was still in question at that point in time. Notre Dame did not smoke Duke. Their offense struggled for most of that game, like they did in a lot of ACC games this year. So he was a clutch player. I think he's a very versatile player. He is the kind of player people say, well, you don't have enough weapons to do RPOs. I'm sorry. Yes, you do. There's just like we talked about George Takis, there's a lot of teams in the ACC. North Carolina, you look at what Daz Newsome did. I'll take Avery Davis over Daz Newsome any day of the week. Avery Davis could be a number 2 receiver for a lot of teams in the ACC, and Notre Dame is using him just to me like as sort of like an afterthought at times. And when they did finally target him, he stepped up and made big plays.
Yep.
So, I want to see him be a focal point. And now that he's going to be a fifth-year senior, he's the most experienced player. The odds are strong that they're going to use him more. I hope that they don't jerk him around and put him outside a bunch because I really like him in the slot.
Yes.
But, when you put him outside, use him correctly, motion him, maybe throw him some screens, do some different things with him. So, I mean, you can have some scenarios in which he can be outside. I think you should always move guys around. But I think Avery Davis, and this is a bit of projection, I'm going to give the staff the benefit of the doubt that they're going to say, hey, look, we got this really good football player. Let's use him more. I think he could be a real breakout player this year. And I think having him in the slot, making plays with Michael Mayer also being a sort of between the hashes, between the numbers guy as a tight end would then take a lot of pressure off the up-and-coming outside players like Kevin Austin, Braden Lindsey, Xavier Watts, Jordan Johnson. So now you've got these 2 really established middle-of-the-field type weapons that are going to occupy a lot of the attention of safeties on opposing teams. I think gives Notre Dame a chance to then develop the outside players. And I think it helps with the run game as well. So I think Avery Davis could be a difference maker for Notre Dame. And I don't mean difference maker like he's going to put up Will Fuller or Golden Tate numbers, but I mean difference maker in that he's going to have a lot of clutch plays. His production should double next year, in my opinion. And then that means you now have to focus on him a little bit more. I would like to see him kind of do some things with the run game, maybe a wildcat, put him in the backfield. This would be fun to see, right? Like, imagine if you kind of went to this look for just to start off a series, just to jerk with another team, right? Just leave your quarterback on the sideline. Put Avery Davis in the game, have Kyron Williams to his left, Chris Tyree to his right, Michael Mayer in the slot, Jordan Johnson and Xavier Watts or Jordan Johnson and Kevin Austin or Braden Lindsey and Kevin Austin or Braden Lindsey and Jordan Johnson. You get the point?
Yeah.
And just say, let's go real fast and we're going to run read zone. And we're gonna do some different. We're gonna run.
It's like a 3 or 4
power.
Yeah, it's like a 3 or 4 play package. That's all you need.
And if you bring everybody down, and we're gonna throw a bomb.
Yep.
He's just gonna say, "Hey, Avery, drop back and throw it as far as you can to either Kevin or Jordan or Xavier or Braden." Right.
Yep.
And now imagine, and if it works, what are the next 5 teams you're gonna play have to spend at least 30 to 45 minutes of practice time on that week?
Exactly.
What are we gonna do when they go Wildcat?
Yep.
And you may not even do it the next week.
And that means
they've prepared for it.
That means they're not preparing for something
your
else.
Others. Exactly.
Yes.
So, that's just the kind of creativity and fun that we need to see that we just don't see from Brian Kelly's very structured, regimented offense that lacks any creativity whatsoever.
Yeah.
And again, that's not a Tommy Rees problem. That's a Brian Kelly problem. So I think Avery Davis is a guy you can have a lot of fun with as an offensive coordinator if your head coach allows you to have a lot of fun with him as an offensive coordinator. And he's a guy that I think has the kind of athleticism and playmaking ability to be a really good player. He was a 4-star. He was like the 220 player in the country by ESPN. And people say, wow, was a quarterback. No, go read ESPN's analysis of him coming out. They said we probably going to end up playing somewhere else. They viewed him as a 4-star because they had the foresight to see he's probably going to stay at quarterback.
Well, yeah. Look, here's my thing on Avery Davis. I think everything you said, I agree with. I think that, this will be the 2.5 year that he'll be at receiver.
Because he played quarterback, corner, running back,
and
now back to receiver.
Right. And so having another year in the same position is only going to benefit him because there's still some things that he can polish up in the route running and things of that nature. So another year is going to benefit him. That's the first thing. And number two, off the field, he's obviously going to be the most senior wide receiver in that room.
Yeah.
And that leadership, you can't take that for granted. Right. I mean, if you take him off and he leaves the team, there's, who's
your veteran receiver at that point in time?
That's exactly right.
Kevin Austin?
He's the clear leader.
Lindsey?
Yeah, right. He's the clear leader now in that room. So I think that's huge too. And so bringing him back and keeping him around for a fifth year, I think is going to be a nice bridge to maybe that next group of guys that are going to be your leaders at that wide receiver position. So just because there's so much inexperience overall from that wide receiver group, having him around, it's absolutely huge. So I love that pick. And if I was thinking about it, I might have gone that direction. Still like my guy George. But you can make a really, really good case for Avery Davis on this one. For sure.
I think your two picks have to kind of go together though.
Sure.
Like if Tremble's going to be a big loss, then it would make sense to project someone else coming back. Because if Tremble leaves and you view that as the loss that you view it as, then if you also lose George Takis, now Kane Barong and Kevin Bauman aren't playing in 2021 because they're good enough to play. They're playing in 2021 because they have to play.
Right.
And I never like playing freshmen because you have to. I like playing freshmen because you should or because they're good enough. And
like when Hainsey was a freshman, he battled his way into that spot. Like we got to put him on the field.
There was no reason to Myron Tungville and Kurt Heinrich's freshmen played because they had to. It was either them or Brandon Tiassum. I mean that was it. So that's the difference of the situations. Is I like playing freshmen because they earn it. I mean, you didn't have to play Michael Mayer this year. He just was too good not to play.
Correct.
I mean. There might have been a revolution, at Notre Dame this year if Michael Mayer didn't play, along with Jordan Johnson and Xavier Watts not playing, and Chris Tyree being a second afterthought for half of the season. So, I get why you went with that because I think those two things go hand in hand. So, let's talk defense, Vince, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on
the biggest loss
because that's an easy one.
If we would have picked anybody else besides
you
Jeremiah
would not be on the next show.
We would have to shut everything down. Like this is
unsubscribe from the channel. We're horrible analysts. We don't know what we're doing. That would be the response that I would recommend everyone to have if we went with anyone other than Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Plus, there really wasn't anyone else to go with.
Right.
Because the premise is guys that you lost that had normal eligibility left. Ogundiji and Adetokunbo Ogundiji. Right. Because everyone had another year.
Correct.
But Adetokunbo Ogundiji, Dalen Hayes were both fifth-year seniors. Nick McLeod was a fifth-year senior. Sean Crawford was a sixth-year senior. Those guys were all kind of gone anyway. And so he was really the only option. And even if there were other options, he still would have been the option. Now, we both agree that he should have gone pro. There was no reason for him to come back.
Look, why do you go to college? Anybody. Why does anybody?
To prepare for your future, 100%.
To prepare for your career, right? And he did that. He came in.
Now at the top of his field, and he's getting job offers.
That's right.
Like, I've always kind of laughed at this notion of he should come back and get his degree. Well, if you were a junior at Notre Dame as a student, as an you're an architecture program or you're in whatever program, and the top firm in your field says, hey, we don't need you to take that senior year. We're ready to hire you now, and we're going to pay you top dollar to do so. No, I got these 2 classes I need to take as a senior.
Yeah.
No, you do it. And, obviously with normal jobs, people don't do that. You have to get your degree first. But in football, that's the reality is sometimes they may want you before you do finish your eligibility. And so do it. He should have left. And so there's no argument there, but that's a huge loss, and that's a huge, there's no one that's going to do what he does, at least at that position, and that's not what they're going to ask anyone to do. So it's a big loss, and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was clearly the guy that the defensive staff is going to have the hardest time replacing, and would have had the biggest impact had he returned, and that's a no-brainer. So we're not going to waste your time,
right?
We thought about should we come up with a second guy for argument's sake? I'm like, no, I would lose respect for myself. I'm not going to take a point of view that I don't at least somewhat like I may say, okay, well, that was my number 1 too, but I'll go ahead and make the case for my number 2 because it's a legit. No.
Just to have an argument.
We respect y'all way too much to come up with anybody other than Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. So let's talk about the returners, because I think that's a little different. I mean, there were some guys, guys that could have come back. Some of the losses that we thought about, like Ovia Gofu, Jack Lamb, those were not needle movers from the standpoint of what Jeremiah Wusu had, which is why we didn't go there. But there were some other guys that could have left that decided not to leave. And, obviously Myron Tungavaloa came back. Kurt Heinisch is a guy that took advantage of the COVID year because he played 4 years in Notre Dame, and he's coming back for a 5th year, and he'll actually have played for 5 years. So he's the only guy that so far that's taken advantage of that COVID eligibility. So there's been guys that are coming back, but you and I both have a guy in mind, and actually we have a different guy. I ended up coming back we're on the same guy, because I went back and forth on a couple different guys, but I just had to look at my notes like, no, we are the same guy. So Vince, you go ahead and intro that the guy that Notre Dame got back, that wasn't a given to get back, that we think was most important to Notre Dame being able to have success in 2021.
Yeah, this one was easy for me because if they didn't get him back, the depth chart at safety was a shambles. It was a disaster. And so Houston Griffith is my guy because he had both feet out the door. Like, he was in the transfer portal. I mean, we were hearing that it was, don't let the door hit you on the way out. It's like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm out. I'll see you off to greener pastures.
I want to clarify that a little bit, because the don't let the door hit you on the way out
sound like Notre Dame.
It seem like Notre Dame didn't want him. That's not true. Notre Dame definitely wanted him back. He was like, I'm gonna slam the door in your face on my way out.
That was a bad turn of phrase on my part.
Notre Dame definitely wanted to keep Houston Griffith,
but he was done. I mean, he was out. And Marcus, we've chronicled this. I mean, Marcus Freeman did what he needed to do the second he got the job. He reached out to the Griffith family and said, look, we need to talk. And he was able to convince Houston to come back without the promises of starting. Well, look, he's going to start. I don't know if that's a news flash or not, if you want to put that on the ticker down at the bottom, but Houston Griffith is going to start at safety. And the 1-2 punch of Houston Griffith and Kyle Hamilton, I think, could be amazing. Now, Notre Dame still has issues with the depth chart. They still got some things to figure out and prove and figure out where they want to be with the depth chart and who's going to come in. And if they're going to do, a 3 safety look, who is that? Are they going to use a nickel from the corner? I mean, there's a lot to figure out there. But the fact that
there you go, Vince.
That's awesome. See, there it is. Check out our ticker. So breaking news. So Houston Griffith solidifies the 1-2 punch at safety. And if he wasn't there, that second safety position is a giant question mark right now. And the fact that he's back can allow you to do other things. Look, is he perfect? No, he's not perfect. But I think now that he knows he's going to be the starter, okay, the pressure's going to be off. And I've said this before. You and I were at the one spring practice in 2020 back in March, and he was lined up as the starter, and he was flying all over the football field, making plays. And granted, it was one practice, but I saw a guy that was unencumbered with any kind of pressure, with any kind of stress. He was just playing football. And I think now that he's back, and now that all the nonsense is out of the way, there's a new coordinator, there's a new safeties coach, I just feel like he is going to make some massive strides, and he's locked down the top end of that depth chart. And if he's not there, we're having a completely different conversation.
Yeah, so I thought about going with Kurt Heinisch because I just love the motor he brings. I think he brings some leadership that they need, but I just kind of feel like the depth chart there is so good. I mean, I don't even know if he's necessarily the most talented player that they could play there. I could see Jacob Lacey, if healthy, being the more talented and productive player. I could see, Aiden Keana really making a rush. I could see Gabriel Rubio playing there. So, I mean, but the leadership part made me really want to go with there. But the fact that there are so many other options, I kind of went away from it. I thought Tariq Bracy not leaving, to me, I think is important because they need him to at least try to get back to being who he was before at a pretty young and inexperienced depth chart. But I went with Houston for similar reasons that you did, Vince. Now, where you and I somewhat disagree is I still think Houston has a lot to prove.
Okay.
And I don't think the safety depth chart is solidified from the standpoint of it's going to be a proven success. I think it's solidified from that we know who the two starters are going to be or should be. But I do think Houston still has a lot to prove. I don't want to just assume he's going to play well. I agree with you that I think he's going to play well, but I need to see him still do it. And we talked about this on a previous podcast. I need to see Houston to go out and be the guy that we've seen him flash to be in practice and occasionally have seen flash in games. Had he not come back, to your point, they would have been in big trouble.
Yes.
I would even still consider looking for a graduate transfer if it's the right guy to solidify the depth chart. Now, I'd still want to start Houston, but that's how little confidence I have in the safety depth chart behind your first two guys.
I get that.
But Houston still has to prove a lot to me. I think he will. If I was a betting person, I would bet on him proving his talent and proving he belongs. And I think by the end of the year, I could see the running back situation looking a lot like it was, or the safety situation kind of looking a lot like the running back position was in some past seasons, where we go into last year and you're like, I don't really know about the running back depth chart, and I'm not sure if this is going to happen or that's going to happen. And then all of a sudden Kyron Williams emerges and takes over job. Chris Tyree steps up and has a really, really good freshman season. And Sebo Flemister got his opportunities. He went and made plays and ran hard and showed some good things. So by the end of the year, the running back position, which was a big question mark, became a strength. We've seen that happen before. 2018, the running back depth chart was a big question mark because you had Dexter Williams is going to be suspended. You had Jafar Armstrong, who you'd moved from receiver. You had Tony Jones Jr. And kind of what's it going to look like? Well, it ended up being a really good part of their team that year. So I think that the safety depth chart I expect and predict the safety rotation, the 1-2 guys, the safety starting lineup will be a strength by the end of the year is my prediction.
Yes.
But I'm not ready to say, it's a given. It's going to happen. I need to see it. I need to see Houston Griffith do what we know he's capable of doing. I think he will, but he still has to prove it. But the reason also that I went with him too, Vince, is like I said, I don't have a lot of faith in what's behind him. And if he doesn't step up, if he doesn't prove himself, Notre Dame could be in big trouble. Yeah. Because now you have to use Kyle Hamilton differently. You have to use Kyle Hamilton to protect that weakness that is your second safety. You have to maybe move a corner there. And we saw what happened this year when they moved a 60-year senior corner there who hadn't played that position before. It's not just as easy just sliding over and you figure it all out. It took a smart, heady, experienced guy like Sean Crawford really half the year to just get comfortable with proper angles and tackling. And he was a guy that's played a lot of football. Yeah. And he still wasn't great at it. So it's not as simple as just, we'll just move so-and-so over there.
Yeah, no big deal.
It doesn't quite work like that all the time.
Right.
So, and then that guy's probably competing to figure out who's the heck's going to start at cornerback this year. So safety's probably the biggest concern for me as a whole. Obviously, Kyle Hamilton's going to be great, but as a whole, will the second starter be good? What if Kyle Hamilton gets injured? What if it's like, hey, we need to use him in sort of that third safety role in some games downhill and put him in the slot and match up, but we can't because we don't have anybody else to take him. There's just so many things that could impact Kyle Hamilton negatively if that second guy doesn't step up and play well. You may have to use him more as a free safety and getting him away from line of scrimmage because you have to protect your other safety and your corner. So that's where it gets concerning for me is if that other safety doesn't step up, it doesn't just impact one position. I think it impacts two. Yep. And that's why it's so important. And like I said, I think Houston's going to be really good, but he needs to show me. He's got to show it to me. I'm not as convinced that it's definitely going to happen. I mean, I think he should have played this year, but he needs to show that now as a starter, what can he do? And that's going to be it's going to have a big say on what this defense is going to look like in 2021 because there's a lot of other positions I feel really good about where it's going to be. So that's one.
So both the guys you selected were both number 3, by the way. I just want to throw that out there.
Oh, yeah. I didn't really think about that. Yeah. I don't know. Something about that number. I don't know what it is. I'm going to have to sit down and think through what that means. But no, it's going to be an interesting year.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Notre Dame has some big shoes that guys have to fill. But
no question.
That's kind of that's what the great programs do, right? Like Alabama lost – Tua Tagovailoa. They lost Jerry Jeudy. They lost Henry Ruggs, and their offense was even better. That happens. I mean, and they lost Jalen Waddle halfway through the year. And, so look, the great teams lose guys, right?
Yep.
Clemson lost a ton from their 2019 team that played for the title and still went back to the playoff, right? So Notre Dame is going to they're going to have different strengths next year, and different guys are going to have to step up. And I think if the guys we brought up all step up, that's going to be a big step towards reloading, and that's where Notre Dame should be. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Irish Breakdown podcast. So make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that notifications bell to let you know that when our new shows come out. We are basically going to sit down these next couple of days and really hammer out as many topics as we can. But we also want to hear from you guys. If there are topics you'd like to see us discuss in any format, whether it be a written story at irishbreakdown.com, whether it be a video on YouTube, whether it be a podcast, whatever questions you have. And we've done a couple shows now on ideas that other people that we've had people ask. The quarterback podcast we did last week was one that somebody had asked about on our YouTube channel. So let us know
and it's been popular.
Yeah. And let us know kind of things that you'd like us to address. We had somebody bring up, hey, how about doing sort of an X's and O's on the defense recently about, explaining to us kind of how the safeties work and things like that. So it's going to take some time to put that film together and do that, but I want to do stuff like that. And this off season, we're going to get to stuff like that. So there's a couple other things that we're working on. So if you have some ideas that you'd like us to discuss in any of our formats, website at irishbreakdown.com, the irishbreakdown.com YouTube channel, or the irishbreakdown.com podcast, let us know and we'll address it. And sometimes it may be like, that's a topic for someone else. So let's go get a guest to come on and break that down. So, and we'll try to do that. So we're definitely trying to expand. We want to bring you guys as much great content and coverage as possible in as many formats as possible. And all that we ask that you do is that you read and watch our stuff, read our website, keep doing that. Then we can grow and go hire somebody to do recruiting, keep watching our YouTube channel. Cause our goal ultimately is to try to keep this free for you.
Absolutely.
And as long as you help us keep growing, like y'all have helped us keep growing, that's what we want to do. So subscribe, hit the notifications, subscribe to our podcast, and make sure that every day you're reading irishbreakdown.com. And the best way to do that is to sign up for our free newsletter. You get in your mailbox every morning, and it'll have the stories that we put up from the day before. So you'll see that at the bottom of every article we write. So for Vince D'Addario, I'm Brian Driscoll. Thanks for joining us, and we will be back with you again very soon.